Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist.
That's right. You heard it from Steve. He's been in the business for 30 years, so this guy knows what he's talking about.
I should hope so.
So how this works is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. Today's topic is how withholding stifles intimacy.
Withholding...
anything you could think of. So,
like sex? Or are we talking
sex,
about
information, like what's going on in your mind? I mean, just really any sort of withholding, like
cash,
as far as like
cash,
maybe that cash especially. So before we kick off the conversation, if you have a question for Steve, visit stephening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve answers a listener question, so stay tuned for that. And if you enjoy the podcast and find the information helpful, please subscribe and share it with your friends and family. And if you really enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving a review. So this episode, is about withholding cash from your partner and how you should not do that.
If you want intimacy, you got to pay.
But nothing's free these days. But I'd like to start off just by, I know we've talked about this before in other episodes, but I think repetition of these terminology is really helpful for people. So first, to start with, just like, what is your definition of intimacy?
Well, the definition that really works for me, I think, and it's so important, I probably should write a few more articles about it, because a lot of people use it as a kind of a substitute for the word sex or sexual intercourse. And I guess it's supposed to sound nicer, but it's confusing because sex by itself or sexual intercourse is something even a sexual assault could involve, and none of us would say, well, that's some real intimacy right there. So if intimacy isn't sex, then what is it? And a lot of other people would say, no, it's love. If two people are really in love, then that's an intimate relationship. But even that is wrong, because we can be in love, like love at first sight, or in love with someone we barely know. And the love is real. I have no doubt about that. That just overwhelming sense of affection and positive regard for the other person. But it doesn't mean the same thing as intimacy, because intimacy is really about safely sharing our lives with one another. So two friends, for example, could have, say they had 5 or 10 years at least between them, they might be able to share all kinds of things. But because perhaps let's assume they're of the same gender and they're not homosexual, and so they're not sharing sexually, but they might be sharing their sexual histories with one another, their sexual thoughts and feelings, like who they're in love with lately, who they're with, how things are going, what their beliefs are about sexuality. They're also probably enjoying a lot of intellectual intimacy, sharing ideas safely back and forth with one another. They might be enjoying, and probably are enjoying, a lot of social intimacy, emotional intimacy, where they're safely sharing their feelings with one another. So friends can be very intimate, and therapy relationships can be very, very intimate, even in a group therapy setting. I think it's remarkable how close people can get in group therapy. I think it's really, to me, one of the most privileged experiences a therapist will ever go through, is enjoying that sort of group intimacy.
And do you think that is because they have the freedom? You allow them the space to speak freely. Do you think that is one of the main?
Well, I think it happens for a number of reasons. And really, it's not all within the therapist's power. The therapist can and should do the best they can to increase the safety in the room. And that could be with, the minimum necessary rules to make sure there's no abuse and we treat each other respectfully. But after that, I mean, what if you're in a situation where you have people who are court ordered to be in therapy, or people who are ordered by their spouses to be in therapy, or their family has done an intervention and demanded they get into therapy, and there they are, but they're not exactly willing and excited to be there. Even And for a moment at least, they may be hand grenading all the attempts at developing some real rapport and some real intimacy. But no matter what the resistance is, generally speaking, the positive effects of positive group pressure generally draw people out. Where there's an environment where people feel safe, they typically will draw out even the shyest among us or the most resistant. Now, there are people who commandeer groups and they need to dominate the group schedule, the group time. And I think they unwittingly are really destructive of group intimacy because it's like dating somebody who can't just shut up. So, they may be sharing and patting themselves on the back for thinking they're sharing.
Yeah.
But we've all been in those situations where the other person just, it never occurs to them to ask how you're thinking about something or how you're feeling about something. And they just think they're doing a great job. And with that lack of self-awareness, it never dawns on them that there might be other people in the room with similar thoughts and feelings or quite different thoughts and feelings that are really worth sharing. So it isn't always the therapist because, like I said, any one person can sabotage a relationship.
Yeah. Okay. And
which probably brings us to your cash offer.
Yes. So again, it feels like it's intimacy is about like sharing, and we're talking about withholding, and I guess we could start with more of like the mental and then maybe go to physical as well.
Yeah. And it is, I want to emphasize that word safely too, though. I don't want to forget about that one. So they're sharing, but then they're sharing safely, where I just feel increasingly free to be myself in the company of the other person.
And that's a process. That's not something that just happens.
Wow. I wish there was like a pill or something we could all take.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'd make millions. But no, it is a process for everyone because it takes time. I mean, if you're doing it right, it really takes time to evaluate someone else to see if they are safe, even when you're consciously, thinking about it and you really want to share. It would be foolish for any of us to put out our most intimate, vulnerable truths in front of someone we really haven't qualified.
Yeah. Unless you're a comedian, maybe. So that's what it is. It's this process of getting comfortable with another person, sharing these things little by little, and that's what develops the intimacy. And you want to share as much as possible because there was something you wrote in Psychology Today, I believe, where you said, like, for instance, like keeping secrets. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, say I'm in a relationship with somebody and I'm sharing, but this person's not really sharing. Is that something that could ever work out?
So the verb I use, and I don't even know, in English, we often appropriate nouns and start using them as verbs. And for me, it's laddering up our intimacy. So I step up one rung of the ladder and I offer a little tidbit, say at the beginning of a relationship, something about my favorite band or my favorite type of music. And then hopefully the other person has something equally vulnerable to share about the kind of music they like, or the fact that they may not like the kind of music I like, but they do like this other kind of music. And if it's safe, it really doesn't matter because it's really about getting to know the other person. We don't need to share the exact same taste to be intimate. In fact, I don't think we need to share the same religion or the same politics or anything else in order to be safe with one another, because that's really what we're talking about.
But a lot of people will look at that stuff as far as like, that's how they connect with somebody. Like,
right.
And then that maybe bypasses even the safety.
Yeah. And I feel sorry for them because people who do that, they're seeking, commonality or compatibility. And I get that. And it makes sense to me. And I can see why the temptation lies there, but it's so often not really the answer, because the answer isn't that I want to get together with someone who's so like me that there's really no point of separation, that's really not the strength that couples bring to life. It's the ability to see things from a different perspective, but to share that perspective respectfully, that makes couples such a powerful survival strategy for our species. So that's what I like to see is people just sharing from whatever perspective, and if they're the same on music or any other thing, but as they ladder up their disclosures, as long as it feels safe and the other person shares roughly equally, you're in good shape. But when somebody, like say the listener, is sharing and then sharing again, and nothing is blown up in their face, and then they share one more time and they've climbed up 3 rungs of the ladder and the other person hasn't climbed any of the ladder, then we could have a problem. Because what we don't know is how much of what I shared has met with disapproval and scorn and rejection, because maybe they've just been withholding all of that, thinking that was inappropriate or biding their time for, so sharing even the art you like. And I remember, a woman came over to my house. I was a bachelor in my dating days, and I had some art up on the wall, and she sneered at one of my paintings and said, the subject of the painting happened to be a young African-American girl. And she sneered and said, "You really do like Black women, don't you?" And it was so not what the painting was about that, now imagine if she had just kind of kept that to herself. Now, did that feel safe? There's all kinds of possibilities. Had she never shared how she really felt, and she went on to say other things, similar things about other paintings in my house. And
so it was good she said that.
It was good for me.
Because it gave you the data you needed.
Yeah, first of all, we didn't share a love of fine art, and I wasn't sure we even shared or were compatible intellectually, but it was said with that kind of sneering tone that told me it was conveying disapproval.
Got it.
And to convey disapproval about your taste in art to someone, that doesn't feel very safe. So she took a risk, I suppose you could say, but is it much of a risk to heap scorn on another person? Yeah. I don't think so. I mean, you're sharing honestly, I suppose, from what you really think, but it really doesn't promote any kind of real intimacy.
Yeah. But then if she didn't say that and she kept a secret, that would be even worse though, right?
It would. And that's why I think all dating, for me, all dating is, it should be fun. First of all, if it's not fun, you're doing something wrong. But even the dates that don't result in a long-term committed relationship, or they're great because it's all about the interview. I'm conducting this intentional interview because I really want to get to know this person. And there is no bad interview.
But one thing I think about sometimes, it's like you're on a date and everything's going great. Say it's like your 3rd date and you're like, oh, this is good. This is good. And then like all of a sudden something comes up and you're like, uh-oh.
Right. Right. Then you see the Donald Trump tattoo on her shoulder.
Yeah.
And because she rolls up her sleeve and it's his face and everything. And that's just, wow.
But you have to talk about it though.
Well, I can't talk about it, but it's sort of in a different spirit at that point because I've already mentally drawn a line through her name. I'm not really interested in going there unless she has some amazing story, but I'd want to know the story regardless of where it takes us. Yeah. Because I think I think people are among the most interesting subjects in the universe. How they became who they are. Wow. What were the influences on their lives as they grew up and got their tattoos? And I think to me, it's a privilege and a fascinating one at that, to get to know other people, even when we decide they're really not for us.
Yeah. But do you think that people are afraid to come even at a date with that level of truth and vulnerability to it all?
Well, I think we all have different, and I think everybody listening will agree that some of us have more reluctance to share than others, and sometimes for very good reasons. We've been judged a lot in the past. Some of us are more naive than others, and some people just put it all out there, I think, out of anxiety, because they're really afraid of being rejected. And they think, well, if I can just get this all out of the way. Yes, I have a Donald Trump tattoo, and not just on my shoulder, but I've got it on my whole back. So I have a life-size picture of Donald Trump on my back, and because I have a very big back. And so that would be, if I got all that out there and I'm getting no rejection, then it's sort of like dodging a bullet, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And it's the same with, and going back, because I am so old, I just remember in the 60s, it was women sharing that they weren't virgins, or women and men sharing that they'd been divorced, or single parents with children at home admitting that they had a child. There were all these pitfalls that spelled the possibility of rejection. And a lot of people would keep that information to themselves until the absolute last a moment that they could keep it reasonably to themselves. And then they would make the disclosure. Right. And for a lot of us, it's the same with our educational levels. I dropped out of high school. I dropped out of college. I dropped out of whatever it was, or I just got fired from my last job, or whatever it is that we feel shame about. I think we quite understandably are shy about putting that out there most of the time. Yeah. But I've met ex-cons, for example, who put it out there in the first 10 minutes of a conversation with someone they find attractive, that they just got out of prison and they're charged with such and such. And because they're looking for a cheap fix, I think. And instead of letting the other person get to know them quite naturally and on their own time, asking the questions that are appropriate. There's some amazing people in prison in America. And they are oftentimes the very best people we could ever associate with, whether as friends or as lovers or even married partners. And to get to know somebody, or to allow someone the opportunity to get to know me at their own speed, helps to put my incarceration in context in a way that it would otherwise not be in context. And I think it makes it more understandable for reasonable people. So
you would recommend, when you do go out on a date, just to keep it natural, don't overload them with all this information, all your worst things, and don't hide everything.
Right. I had a client who made a point of letting every woman know about the worst things up front. And he was so delighted when he finally met that special someone, and they were not standing in a parking lot, and within 30 minutes of meeting, they were in the backseat of his car having sex in this public parking lot. And he
After he revealed all the bad stuff.
Yeah. And I looked at him and I said, I know you're very happy about the experience, but let me tell you, no normal woman would be doing that with you after hearing all of that. And I'm warning you right now, this is going to end very badly for you. And he was really very disbelieving, only the very near future laid out just how bad it was. And it got really bad because we would all be naturally inhibited. I don't care what gender you are. If someone tells you they just got out of prison after axe murdering their spouse, and you find them so attractive, you just can't keep yourself from going to bed with them right then and there. Well, then you really haven't done your due diligence in terms of finding out, is this a crime that's likely to repeat itself? I would want to know a lot more. Were they the victim of domestic violence for years and years? Or had their partner simply forgotten their birthday that year? Yeah. It makes a difference.
Yeah, that's good, because it feels like sometimes it's hard. Like, what if it's like you're going and going and going, and it's like, say you're a month into it and you're still revealing, but then you just have to trust that you've built some sort of relationship with another person, that the more we reveal, they're not going to run away, or like, you know what I mean by that?
Um, well, I think I do, but it was so awkward. I had a lot of pleasure listening to you try to get it out. So, do you want to take another run at it? Because I could guess.
I'm saying like it's like, okay, you don't want to give all the information up front. You don't want to hold secrets in, but then like I think people are afraid to do that, just be natural, because they are trying to look, it's like, well, does this person like me? Do they not like me? And then it's like, well, we're a month in and I still haven't told them about this because it just hasn't come up naturally. And then it's like, I'm investing time in this person. And then, like all that sort of like, in the modern age and the modern era of fast paced living, it's like, I don't know. It's like, it's a practice of like slowing down is what you're kind of.
Well, I
pitching.
am encouraging everybody to slow down, because dating is not a matter of, at least in my mind, mostly about efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the investment of time, it'll only make sense if I'm actually enjoying the company of the other person. And if the other person has issues, say they hate tattoos,
Mm-hmm.
and I have 3 tattoos, but they've never asked me about tattoos.
Yeah.
And the subject has never come up in any kind of reasonable way where I would start sharing my tattoo history, then I think that's on them.
Okay.
So, if I think especially for men, it's important to understand that you're dating, hopefully, someone who you would like to think of as an equal. It's not an adoption.
Mm-hmm.
It's a relationship between 2 adults.
Yeah.
She's not a child. So if she has a problem with some aspect of my being, it's really on her to start asking some questions about that, unless it's so obvious to me that, oh, there's going to be trouble down the road when she finds out that I'm registered for this party
Mm-hmm.
or that party. If I don't want to be avoiding conflict, but at the same time, I don't think it's my responsibility to engage in mind reading
Mm-hmm.
and to make the disclosure. For example, like say I'm dating Susan on Friday night, but I date Mary on Saturday. Do I have an obligation to tell both about the other person? I would say no, because it's just a date. Mm-hmm. It's not a committed relationship any more than they have a responsibility to tell me everything they're doing socially with other men throughout that early stage of the dating process. As long as we don't have a commitment, I don't think anybody's guilty of duplicity at all.
But if Susan asked you, what are you doing on Saturday, then what would you say?
I think it brings up an interesting conversation because, sometimes asking is simply curiosity. Sometimes it has to do with being controlling. Mm-hmm. And
so you'd say, Susan, stop trying to control me.
No, I might say something like, that's interesting. Why do you ask? And then to get an answer from her about why it is she's asking. If she's saying, well, I'm just curious. And, well, I might say something like, well, I think it's a really interesting point of intimacy between 2 people getting to know each other. You first.
And then she's like, I have a date with Ted.
Yeah.
Or like, I have a date.
She says, I don't believe in dating anyone other than the one person I am dating at a time. Mm-hmm. Well, that is kind of vulnerable.
Yeah.
But now she's changed the subject a little bit because it's about beliefs. Mm. And I find that very interesting. And I would she might be very focused on the efficiency. Well, if you've seen anyone in the last week, you can never see them again once you've dated me if I like you. But I would want to know, just as she shared her belief, I'd want to know if she's open-minded to people having different beliefs, but still being eligible for further exploration in a relationship. Because I don't want to be duplicitous, but at the same time, I don't want to turn Susan, that's her name, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to turn Susan into my mommy, where I have to report to her all and check and see is it okay? Do I have your permission? Mm-hmm. I don't want to come across that way, nor would I want to come across that way. Mm-hmm. I think between 2 adults who are dating, what we're really looking for at the early stages, at least, is simply respect and, again, fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable to go on a date. And if my date sat down and started and I was having a good time, and then I the subject of dating others came up and she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh my God, I was on a date last night. I could not believe how horrible it was." And that would be an interesting story to me. I would like to know what made that horrible. And I would probably be laughing before very long. And
you wouldn't be like, "You only date me."
Hey, wait a minute. You're not going to be dating anybody if you date me, are you? Anybody else? No, because I think that's unreasonably controlling.
Yeah.
It's really her choice, not mine, who she dates and when she commits and all of that. Mm-hmm. That's a whole nother podcast conversation, right? Is about commitment and the nature of commitment during the stages of dating. But in terms of intimacy, I think having boundaries about the things you feel comfortable sharing, I think are very important. And there are certain truths about all of us that we carry in our hearts that we really don't feel safe sharing with other people unless we've had some demonstration of goodwill and safety and that sort of thing. So, I was talking to a male client not too long ago, and it had taken quite a while before he shared with me his departure from his church.
This was after like years or months, or how long?
It was about a half a year.
Okay.
And he hadn't shared it because he hadn't worked through all the issues in his own head, I think. And he had a lot of very strong feelings about it. And he had never asked me my own religion, or if I had a religion at all. So sometimes we don't know what we're getting into. And I think caution is reasonable, a reasonable amount of caution, right? Yeah. I don't want to be so cautious that the person I'm dating 6 months into it has no idea who I really am and how I really feel.
Yeah. So let's take a trip back to memory lane.
No, I hate these questions.
Let's go back to you were 19 when you first got married, or 20? 20.
So I met her when I was 19.
Okay. So then what about that, as far as like, did you feel that you were sharing stuff during your first marriage, or do you feel like you were withholding? And if so, what were you kind of withholding and why?
My mother said back then that I was just too young to think about getting married. And I rolled my eyes at her because chronological age just seems such a unhelpful metric of readiness. But she was right in the sense that I didn't have enough life experience to even know what intimacy was, or how to share, or what things to look for in the other person. Because for those who've listened to me in these podcasts before, my search criteria back then, during my Jurassic period, was, was she attractive to me, and was she willing to be seen in public with me? And that was the end of the search. And if I got to go on both of those, yes and yes, okay, well then this is it. This is the relationship, until proven guilty, or until it's falsified. Yeah. And I just think I really didn't know what intimacy was, nor did I know how to qualify the other side to know whether they were capable of intimacy. Now, since learning about it, I now evaluate both men and women who are in my personal life for how able they are to share who they are and all of that, because I really don't want my friendships to feel like I'm doing a therapy session. Yeah. And, I've been really fortunate in meeting my wife, because she not only is capable of intimacy, but she also is pretty and willing to be seen with me in public. So we've had, and this is kind of the secret, I think, to this kind of intimacy that we're talking about, is the secret dimension to a great sex life, because it's what keeps sex evergreen, ever growing, and in such a positive way. Because after a couple has had sex in every position, in every room of the house, and maybe out in the backyard, that's they kind of are subject to the possibility thereof, or not even the possibility, the probability of systematic desensitization to each other. And that's why people's sex lives, I think, most of the time just fall off the cliff,
Yeah.
Barring some kind of traumatic event. But if you were truly intimate with each other, the truth is we're all growing and changing over time. And the woman I married, although she's recognizably the same, both internally and externally, she has changed so much. And so have I in the last, say, 30 years that we've known each other.
All right.
So I didn't have any these ideas in my head during my first marriage, both leading up to it and during it. I just knew in my more honest moments, I knew this isn't really working for me. I'm not really happy. And I would have had to admit she doesn't seem happy either. So that's the other side of this is I was too young to be there, but how else was I going to learn but through experience?
Yeah.
And that is painfully true. And the idea to me of reading books, talking to people, being in therapy, doing what we can to grow, being on a journey where I can admit I need to grow, that I think is a huge, giant step forward in intimacy because that way you don't have to experience every version of a failed relationship, which is sort of the trajectory that I was on.
Yeah.
And it was only when I slowed down, to use your term, when I slowed down enough to really reflect on things, I could see, oh, this was a mistake. Oh, that was a mistake too. Oh, and I was guilty of this, this, and this. Oh, I sure don't want to ever do that again. And then to change those behaviors over time, that's really hard. And then in terms of intimacy, I mean, one of my favorite subjects when I was dating was asking an attractive person, gosh, you're so attractive. How could you possibly be single?
Yeah, that's a good line.
Yeah.
It's always stuck in my head.
Because then you get to find out a little bit more reason in a natural way about their relationship history and about their thoughts about relationship history in a very, I think, natural, easy way. And I'm willing certainly to share. I don't think any of us should be asking questions we're not really willing to answer in return.
Yeah, I agree.
So if our date says, well, yeah, I did, and then tells her story, and how about you? I think we should be prepared to climb up that next rung of the ladder and make the disclosures, even if they're not very flattering. And I would just encourage the people listening to this, that unlike so many incel conversations on the internet, I don't think, well, not just incel conversations, I think it's also true of some of the manosphere conversations that you never, ever should share weakness or any point of vulnerability with a woman. And I think that's true as long as you're committed to dating really, really stupid women who just are not even knowing what intimacy or love is. But I think there are so many amazing women out there who really want to know us, and they really want to know that we understand how we came to fail the way we failed. And it's a pretty great process, really. I mean, to be sharing that back and forth, because you learn so much about the other person's humility or lack of, and their insight or lack of into their past.
Nice. And I had a question too, like going back to that first marriage too. Do you feel like,
oh God, here's another one.
But do you feel this will be easy? Do you feel like you were, because it sounds like it has to be, if you're doing this work, you have to be committed to evolving yourself.
Right.
And because you're kind of then evolving as a unit. And did you feel like you were the same person from the start of that relationship to the end? Or did you feel like how much changed within, because that was like 18 years, right?
Yeah. And it was a lot of change, both good and bad, and I think the real change, the positive change for the most part occurred after my marriage, during the debriefing I conducted with myself, in the long, lonely hours as a single man living alone.
So did you feel kind of stagnant then in that relationship? Because it
very much stuck.
Yeah. Because it reminds me of friends or even my own relationship, because it feels like if you're not going into that intimacy realm with mental or even sexual, that's when the stuckness happens. Yeah.
And I mean, because you're trying to build something, you're trying to go forward. And sometimes we think of marriage as a building or an edifice of some kind that we're building, but maybe even thinking about it as a road where we're building it together because we're on a journey going somewhere. But that road, in my case, never got very far from where we started. There was a lot of years in there. There were children. There were a lot of changes in my career. But in terms of actually growing as human beings, I think one of the, you don't know what it is you don't know until you get in a situation where you're not getting your needs met. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, not everybody likes X, whatever X is. Like, not everybody likes affection, or not everybody likes affection at the level I like it. And whether you're a 1 or a 2 on a scale of 10, or you're more like a 7 or an 8 on that scale, it just, for me, it came as a shock. I thought everybody liked to kiss the people they were in love with. It never occurred to me that there were people out there who didn't like that.
And then, so now with your current relationship and your current marriage, you two, from what I've heard, you talk about everything, like even stuff that is maybe difficult to talk about, like if you saw someone attractive or something like that. Some couples wouldn't dare say that with another.
Oh, that's just the easy stuff.
That's it.
Yeah, because, just everybody listening to this, again, if you can just look inside yourself, if you get into a committed relationship, no matter what you call it, does that mean your brain no longer works the way it worked the day before? But no, of course not. We all continue to notice attractive people, and we all are going to continue to have feelings of attraction anytime. The truth is right there in the language. Once I say someone is attractive, that means I'm attracted to them. And when I think it's silly to think that we would never be attracted, but that's also kind of what commitment means, right? So I can be attracted to all kinds of other, in my case, women, but that doesn't mean my commitment to my wife is null and void, or I need to be seeking a hall pass of some kind that, like nurturing a grievance, some kind of grudge against my wife because she forgot my birthday, as if she could ever do that. That somehow that would justify the sense of entitlement it would take for me to step outside of my marital relationship. And I think that applies also to emotional affairs, where I'm not necessarily having sex with anybody or even touching them in any way, but we have this growing emotional sense of connection. And I think for me, the best way to nullify that possibility is by leading a very transparent life. Yeah. And for me, I think regular listeners will know that I really encourage people to be rather lighthearted about it, not like they're going to a church making a confession to Pope Benedict, because I think it's just so natural to say, "Oh my God, I was at this meeting and this girl was paying so much attention to me, I couldn't help but be flattered. And she was beautiful, and she was this, and she was that." And every guy I have ever spoken to, once they feel safe enough to be talking to me about stuff like this, they all admit they've had these experiences. But for so many of us, it's really not, it feels too scary to share that with our spouses. And so we don't. And I think the marriage comes out the loser in that situation. I think our spouses come out the loser, and so do we. We lose the possibility of broadening the scope of our intimacy and hindering growing the depth of our intimacy.
Yeah, these are like the moments that you want to share because they are the harder things to have, the harder conversations to have. And if you're not having those, then you're not really going deeper into that.
That's true. And for those real cowards out there, you have my deepest sympathy, because I too am a real coward. I think sometimes it helps to get into the meta conversation with one's spouse and then to say, I have so many things to share with you that I just find myself really kind of guarded about sharing. Oh, like what? Well, that's just it. I feel very guarded, and I don't know really how to go there because my sense is that you would judge me. Well, why would you think that? Well, because the last time your brother-in-law shared something with your sister, you judged the heck out of him, or just because, the last time I shared with you on a subject like that, it was, I got my head bit off. And to have that conversation about not making the disclosure, but the conversation about how we handle disclosures and what are the rules about that. Because I don't want really any rules in terms of content. I'd like to share, what happened in my life with my partner.
But that's where you're at. But then to get to that level, it's going to start with these meta conversations. That's what it sounds like.
It can start with that. In my case, again, I'm enormously blessed in that my wife is, and always has been, very understanding and accepting of human nature. So I have had a real easy reception, but that hasn't kept me from experiencing my own cowardly feelings of fear, because if you've never opened up this way, even with the most wonderful partner on earth, the most loving, accepting person you could ever imagine, it's still scary if you've never done it before.
Yeah. I think in my last relationship, even trying to have conversations like this, but then sometimes you get a reaction that isn't like the best, or they don't want to talk about it. And then that makes you be like, at least it was for me. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to be the kind of a jerk and be like, no, we have to like have this conversation. And so it's like,
right.
But
we all dream of that. We all dream of being in the relationship where it's really the two of us together, having formed a strategic alliance, facing life together as a team. And so, if, and a true story, my wife is a very pretty woman, and so pretty that she'll come home occasionally with a story, including a hilarious one from years ago where this guy was looking at her so intently at a restaurant as he was walking through the restaurant that, just like a scene in a movie, he ran right into the waiter who was carrying a platter full of like 8 plates that he was serving, which went up in the air. Both men went down on their butts. And it was just, it was the kind of thing that had all of her girlfriends in the moment laughing. And for me, I just feel comfortable hearing those stories, but more than comfortable, it's part of being human. And they're either funny or they're heartwarming, or maybe they're irritating and annoying, but they're certainly not to be repressed. And I think when you use that word early on, that withholding business, I think when it comes to our fantasies about what marriage could be like, our fantasy is that we wouldn't have to guard our lips at all. We wouldn't have to keep things from our spouse at all.
Yeah.
And that's what I would like, whether it's, oh, honey, I impulsively spent this money, or I decided not to go to school anymore, or I quit my job, or, even things that normally we would think should be discussed. I still want to be able to talk about it after the fact. So for me, there's the rule is, how can I make it safe enough for my mate to be as honest as is humanly possible?
And this is true in regards to conversations about sex as well.
Conversations about anything. I mean, for some couples, it's really not even about sex that's the problem. I mean, they're comfortable talking about sexuality, but talking about family, talking about relatives, talking about money, talking about really anything. It's like them's fighting words.
And then that blocks them probably, and that causes issues all around.
Yeah. Like even talking about some doubt about your own relationship. I know that I could go to my spouse and say, sometimes I'm just not sure how to feel about us being together. I have never had that feeling, but I know I could share that feeling. I mean, she'd be surprised because I'm always walking around with the goofy grin of happiness on my face. But she would probably just take a seat and say, oh, tell me more, or how interesting, and how long have you been feeling this way? And those are the sort of safe, responses that help the other person to open up, right?
Yeah.
And I think we all need to learn that skill, because it's just not very skillful to look at somebody, how can you say that, and kind of jump down their throat. That's going to encourage them to keep repressed.
Yeah. Well, you said too, I have a quote here for you. You say, if you're not equally sharing who you are with your partner, you're forever lonely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see that all the time in my office.
With couples?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whether I'm seeing a couple or I'm seeing the individual in a couple, when they, often they're coming to see me because they feel safer telling the therapist their truth rather than telling their spouse. And sometimes they have excellent reasons. If there's domestic violence or there's something really just out of line happening. I think, for the spouse whose partner has been highly critical of them sexually, complaining about how terrible sex is or how bad their body is or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the kind of the kind of partner I would want to open up to, about my feelings about all of that right off the bat. I might want to find a safe third party, like a counselor, to talk to and to check. Because so many times when we're in a really toxic relationship like that, we don't even know, am I normal? Is it normal for people to say things like that?
Yeah.
Am I really that unattractive? Am I really that unskillful when it comes to bedroom activities? And just having somebody go through that, somebody who's at least knowledgeable enough to have an informed opinion, kind of is, I think, helpful.
Yeah, totally.
And then to decide, okay, so what do I do next? And then sometimes the therapist has some really good suggestions.
Yeah. Well, then I don't know. I've been in a similar situation, and
I'm sorry to hear that. That sounds painful.
Yeah, it's not fun. And the therapist, I remember even saying some things like, "Oh, that doesn't sound good," or this or that. I'm like, "It's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it." I'm like.
He said it doesn't sound good, and then the therapist didn't say anything beyond that.
She said, the therapist. It was a she.
Yeah.
She said she would just say, she wasn't like saying you have to get out or like giving me direct advice, but it was definitely like I got the message that the situation wasn't good. So that I think that's what started my brain thinking more about it, being like, oh, here's this outside person who thinks that this situation isn't the most healthy thing.
Right. But sometimes that's just all we need to hear.
Yeah, but then you're fighting it because you don't want to believe that. And then, I mean, at least I was. I mean, I would imagine other patients are like me, where they're like, "Who is this person? They don't know, what's going on," or you're like, "I have it all under control. It's fine. Like I'm okay emotionally." And then it's like the more you go on, the more damage you do.
Yeah, when one of my many faults as a therapist is that I often go too fast because I've seen certain patterns of behavior so many thousands of times that I kind of jump to the conclusion pretty quickly. And often I'll find my clients resent that because they haven't done their own process to get to that same conclusion with me. So I try to match the desired pace of the person I'm working with as much as I can. And that is a little challenging because some people like to go super fast. They just want a bottom line.
Yeah. So you could see it though, like with a person pretty quickly. You're like, okay, I know what to tell this person, know where they're at. But then it's like, now I have to move at their pace and unravel this in a way.
Well, I had a female client who came to me because she was engaged to be married to a guy, and she had some doubts about the nature of the relationship. And he came in once for a session, and I don't think I need to go into the details of the session at all. But at the end, he got up and left comfortably. She stuck around for a few minutes, and I turned to her and I said, "I'm going to tell you right now, as quickly as you possibly can, get away from this person and never see them again." And which sounds horrible, right? I mean, I know that sounds horrible, but she took the advice, and within a year, he had murdered another woman.
Wow. Jeez.
So, sometimes I think you have to go fast.
Yeah.
Because, and you have to hit people over the head with the 2x4 abruptly, because otherwise the therapist risks becoming part of the homeostatic system and you're incapable of rocking the boat because you're part of the stability of the system.
Yeah.
The couple that's just marginally hanging in there, and they've been seeing you for 3 years because somehow seeing you every once in a while bleeds off enough of the tension that they're able to
sustain.
And I don't really think that's doing anybody any favors.
Yeah. And then, so one last thing then so you also said our ability to love is limited to the degree in which we know them.
Yeah, it's always going to be limited. Like, I've experienced love at first sight, and it was a great feeling. And I've loved the fairy tales or even the novels that had that sort of fairy tale experience. But reality, there's just no escaping reality and the force of it, because logically speaking, how can I really say I love somebody if I don't know a damn thing about them?
Yeah.
Other than she's really attractive. And that's hard.
And they like to be seen with me in public.
Well, they may not even want to be seen with me in public, because I could fall in love with somebody who doesn't even know I exist.
Mm-hmm.
I might have been, carrying the torch for this person I work with, for example.
All right.
But I've never said anything, and because it's a workplace, and I'm just over there crushing on her really hard, or I felt it was inappropriate because she was married. I didn't, want to ruin her marriage or anything like that. But so you could fall in love, but I have never met a guy yet who didn't fall in love with some woman who is incredibly beautiful, get together in a relationship, only to find out that she was mean and abusive, very much unloving, and then even her beauty disappeared. She was no longer attractive to him. I don't know any guys who've never experienced that, because once you experience how mean a beautiful woman can be, the meanness just evaporates all the beauty that was there. It just no longer exists. And I think every guy knows that. And it works the same in reverse for women. I'm sure that whatever it is they did find attractive about a guy, once the abuse starts up and it becomes a chronic problem, I'm sure they are not finding him so wonderful after all. And had they to do it all over again, they would not get involved with him if they knew then what they know now.
Yeah, great. So let's wrap it up there. And to end, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, you could visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. And this week's question says, "Dear Mr. Ing."
How formal.
"I agree with you that school sex ed programs are really inadequate. I do try to talk to my 15-year-old son, but he will not, in all caps, discuss these topics with me. I know that some teens can get caught up in phishing, illegal online porn, and sting operations just from being young and terribly naive. I am terrified he will make a dumb mistake and ruin his life. I don't know what to do. Signed, Scared Single Mom."
Oh my God. Yeah. So there's so much there to address, right? And then there's no way a short answer is going to address everyone's situation. Myself, I think waiting till someone is 15 is just so way too late. Yeah. And in terms of I think the best thing, if we're going to help our children grow up to be sexually healthy, is it starts with, are they doing well with friends? Do they have real friends, IRL? See, I'm not that old. Do they have real friends in real life? Are all their friends virtual and they don't even know where they live because they're all over the world playing video games together? Those aren't real friends. Real friends exist in the real world with you. And they may be out of state because you moved from where you grew up, but you've known them and spent so much time with them. And those friends are the ones who teach us the basics of relationships and what it is we're looking for and what works for us. And they're also the people we can go to and talk to about failed relationships, or what do you think's going on when something confusing happens in our lives. Second to that, I do think, and for me, sex education really needs to be more about the context of human relationships. So the idea that a 15-year-old boy is going to ever dislike porn is a non-starter, because beautiful naked women posed in alluring positions or if assuming he's heterosexual, or the same kind of imagery in the gay world, that's always going to be attractive. Like that, we're kind of hardwired to find that attractive.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like the most superficial part of getting to know somebody. And as long as people are, looking at porn in that way, which I'm not even saying I'm against looking at porn, but becoming dependent on porn is another conversation altogether. So if our 15-year-old never develops a crush or a girlfriend or anything like that, I think it's a real problem. Lastly, I'm going to say it really doesn't matter how uncomfortable he is, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a conversation. The way, and I hate to say this to this mom, but in a way she's pressuring and manipulating her son, and he's feeling that and he's pulling back, when actually she could take more of a risk or take a risk within acceptable limits and simply read from the newspaper one story a week about something sexual. And it doesn't have to be some sexual horror story where things went very, very wrong, involving sex trafficking of teenagers.
Yeah.
It could be something like a new scientific discovery or some comment on the politics of our nation. We almost always have sexual stories in the news. It could be something regarding religion and sexuality. And then just to lean back and, after reading a paragraph, say, from a story like that, to lean back in your chair and say, wow, what do you think of that? And shake your head and then just go back to reading. You don't even have to have a conversation. You're communicating in doing this kind of sharing. You're communicating that sexual topics are okay. It's okay to think things through. You're planting little seeds in his big teenage brain. And he's going to be thinking about these things later in the day or later in the week or later in life. And I think doing something like that once a week, it would be perfectly natural and normal. And it could be a conversation just between mom and dad at the table, or for the single parent, mom and the boyfriend who slept over the night before. Yeah. No, don't be doing that. Or it could be, a girlfriend who came over and shared brunch with the family or something like that. It doesn't have to be so intense. I think once the kids are in their mid-teens, it's so late in the game that it just feels like we've maybe lost control, and we're trying desperately to get him up to speed when we've been actually ignoring his sexual development for far too many years.
Yeah. And I have a thing that I could offer her. Just talk to him like a human.
Yeah.
It's like, I remember being 15 and having my parents talk about it, and the awkwardness that they have would then make you feel awkward. I remember that.
Yeah. I think if your parents could have simply talked to each other back and forth as if you weren't in the room, that might have helped them feel more comfortable and achieve the same desired goal.
Yeah.
Where you're learning something. But this writer, she's a single mom, and there's also the whole gender thing, I think, that's at play, because none of us want to be guilty of emotionally incesting our children. And there are certain taboos that it's really hard for, I think, a 15-year-old boy to talk about sex stuff with his mom.
Yeah.
And especially because she's going to have her own values and her own feelings about this. And, well, you certainly wouldn't be dating two girls at the same time. That's terrible. Whereas, most guys, adult guys, would be saying, way to go. Keep up the good work. I think, I just think that our favorite and still most beloved scientist America's ever produced, Benjamin Franklin, the man who tamed lightning, is so right when he says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Because now she's trying to cure a situation that she finds distressing. And it would have been so much easier when he was 8 or 9 years old, 10 years old, to be reading a story out of the newspaper. And where, across the masthead, it says something like, all the news that's fit to print. So to be reading a story from the public newspaper or from a book, a novel that one of the parents is reading, hey, listen to this. And, what do you guys think of that? And then just to shake your head and disregard the silence that follows. If nobody says anything, then nobody says anything. That's okay. But I think, especially if you start at 8, 9, 10 years of age, most children are going to have a very natural reaction. Oh, that sounds terrible. Or, oh, that sounds wonderful. And it just doesn't matter what they say or even what they think, because we're not trying to teach them what to think. We're trying to teach them how to begin thinking rationally, and that sexuality and dating and relationships are worthy of rational discussion.
Great. Perfect ending. So thank you for the question, and thanks, Steve, as always, and we will catch you all later.